Welcome back to Live from Paris. A catch up on our headlines here this evening. Strike action over pension reforms is in its fifth day across France. Public transport in particular has ground to a halt. We'll bring you all the latest on the biggest strike action the country has seen since 1995. The World Anti-Doping Agency has banned Russia from international sport for 4 years for doping offences. That means no Summer Olympics in Tokyo next year and no World Cup in Qatar in 2022. More on that with France 24's Simon Harding in the Sports Bulletin coming up in about 15 minutes' time. And Apple Inc.'s television news drama The Morning Show scored 3 Golden Globe nominations on Monday, putting the iPhone maker in the running for its first major Hollywood awards as a new player in the crowded streaming video market. More on those Golden Globe nominations later on in the show. Another hectic day for commuters across the French capital, indeed across the country. Commuters here in Paris had another difficult day on public transport. Widespread strike action continued into its fifth day. The industrial action was sparked by the government's planned pension reforms. Most metro lines and trains are not running, while heavy traffic was reported around the Paris region. The disruption is starting to take its toll on some commuters, as Peter O'Brien found out.
Emmanuel Macron is selling, breaking, killing our retirement. This kind of slogan has appeared on strikers' placards around France over the last few days.
We will continue until we see a result. Macron needs to withdraw his retirement law.
Details of the reform are yet to be unveiled, but protesters are already in uproar. There's set to be a transition to a system where workers accumulate points towards a pension over the course of their career, rather than it being calculated on the last 6 months before retirement. This has caused fear over how many points you'll gain if temporarily unemployed, or on parental or sick leave. And public sector employees fear the new system would mean a large cut to their pension. The reform also points towards people having to work for longer. Currently, train drivers can retire at 52 and public utility workers at 57. The plan would get rid of this kind of special treatment, which strikers say would punish those with physically demanding jobs and lower life expectancy. The points system will also likely benefit private sector employees. Emmanuel Macron is pro-business, and the unions organising the strikes want to stop what they believe is a plan to give power to company owners at the expense of worker protections.
Now, to discuss further, we're joined in studio by France 24's Philip Turrell. Now, Philip, how did you get to work today? And more importantly, not that that's not important, where are we getting any closer to finding a way out of this impasse?
Well, today I managed to take a car and a train and do part of the journey on foot. The other day I walked all the way home. That was a 2.5-hour journey. And to answer your second question, no, we're not any closer to finding a solution to this strike, because there was a meeting early this afternoon between the unions and government representatives. Jean-Paul Delevoye, the man who is behind the plan for the strikes, working it out on behalf of President Emmanuel Macron, and the Employment Minister Agnès Buzyn. That meeting was attended by the unions, but they said they were not going to get involved with the negotiations while they weren't sure exactly what the programme the government is going to unveil on Wednesday is. That programme being the final outcome of what the government plans to do for pensions.
So basically, we've got loads of different pension regimes depending on your profession, and they're trying to kind of merge the whole thing on a points-based system. And what you have the union saying is, we don't even want to hear about a points-based system.
Yeah,
so
the basic
from their
bottom
point
line,
of view, they don't even want to discuss the principle on which the reforms are even based.
That's correct.
Right?
Well, in fact, the unions have mixed demands as well, which doesn't make it any easier for the government. But the basic bottom line is the government is arguing that there are more old people in France, there are fewer people who are in activity. Therefore, the system is becoming top-heavy and it's got to be made lighter. That means there are several alternatives. Either we'll work longer, therefore over 62, which is the legal retirement age, and now they're putting in a sort of another age of 64, where you should work to get a full pension even if you can retire at 62. And if you stay even longer than that, you get a 5% bonus in your pension every year afterwards. The second thing, of course, is that they do away with these pension regimes, these 42 different regimes in the country, and just bring in one regime which is applied to both public and also state pensions. That's something the unions are very much against. And the third thing is this point system, which means basically that while you're working, you get a series of points given to you every year while you're in employment. And when you retire, those points are transferred into money, and that is what your retirement pension will be based on. But it won't be based, as in the private sector, on the 25 best years that you'd worked. It'll be based on the entirety of your working career, and it won't be based on the 6 months before you retire, which is the system in the state system, the state regime. It'll be based also on the entire career, which means that people will basically be worse off afterwards, and that's why the unions are up in arms about this.
Right. Now, I think perception overseas a lot of the time is, well, doesn't France have, above average redistribution? Aren't people retiring quite early there? What's all the fuss about? But here in France, these protests are being really supported by the majority of people. Despite the havoc, despite the fact that people can't get around and it's looking like it could last to Christmas,
well,
people are supporting the protesters.
It's a contradiction, because most French people are in favour of a reform of the pension system. They say it's necessary. We had a figure of 64% last week of French people saying that they were in favour of it, and over 50% support the protesters who are actually striking at the moment. But where they don't agree is that they say, OK, we need to have an overhaul of the pension system, but we don't think this government under Emmanuel Macron is going to be the right one to do it. It's too vague, it's too drastic, and at the end of the day, we don't need a pension reform of this type. We don't want a point system like they have in Sweden. We just want an overhaul of the retirement system. But the France can support the system as it is at the moment. Therefore, the government is going too far, and we don't want to be worse off as a result of it. So yes, for reform, but no, we don't want Emmanuel Macron's government to do it. And yes, these strikes, the misery that we've seen over the last 5 days, looks set to continue, James, certainly until Thursday, because on Wednesday, the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, is due to announce in public the measures, the actual proper reform programme that the government wants to put into effect, because that is still not established yet. And depending on the reaction from the unions, either the strike continues or it comes to an end on Wednesday. But my feeling is that probably that strike will continue, and it looks like more misery in store for us, maybe up until Christmas.
More 2.5-hour strolls to and from work.
Yes.
Or a bike.
Good for the legs.
Purchase a bike, perhaps.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Philip. Now, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany began talks in Paris on Monday to find a way to end the 5 years of fighting in eastern Ukraine that has killed some 14,000 people. The 4 leaders are holding a series of meetings at the Elysee Presidential Palace right now to try to revive a 2015 peace deal that has been largely ignored. The so-called Minsk agreement helped to reduce the intensity of the fighting, but Ukrainian soldiers and Russian-backed separatists have continued to exchange fire across trenches along a front line that slices through eastern Ukraine. New Delhi police say that they have arrested the owner and manager of an illegal factory that caught fire on Sunday. The blaze, one of the deadliest in the Indian capital in decades, killed 43 people. Now in the aftermath, relatives are beginning to identify their loved ones. The latest on that with Claire Rush.
Scenes of grief outside a New Delhi morgue. After hours of uncertainty, relatives learned their loved ones were among those killed in Sunday's blaze.
When we found out about the fire, we went to the hospital. It took around 5 or 6 hours to learn if he was dead or alive. Initially, there was confusion. There was no information or list. After a lot of effort and running around, we learned he was dead. We confirmed his identity with a photograph.
This man lost 2 brothers-in-law who both left behind families.
They were the main breadwinners in the family. The elder one has 3 daughters, and the younger one has 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girls are young. How will they be looked after?
43 people were killed when a fire erupted in an illegal factory in the narrow alleyways of New Delhi's Old Quarter. The blaze broke out early Sunday morning local time, when at least 100 workers were sleeping inside. The factory, which mainly made school bags, burned for hours before the fire was brought under control. Emergency services struggled to access the congested lane where the building was located. Police say they've arrested the owner and a manager of the site, one of nearly 30,000 illegal factories reported by local authorities last year.
Now, they're one of the last great nomadic peoples of the planet. The Fulani are a community of some 35 million people scattered across 15 countries in West Africa. They migrate with their cattle, often following the swing of the seasons. But because of conflict, religious extremism and climate change, their age-old way of life is under threat. This report by our colleagues at Agence France-Presse.
After travelling hundreds of kilometres through the bush, this herd can finally take a sip of water. It has taken them weeks to get here. Having spent the dry season in Nigeria, Ibrahim and his family left in July to travel to the wet grasslands of Niger.
During the dry season, we always have a water problem. It rained earlier this year, so the ponds and watering holes were full, but the drought came back. The watering holes dried up, and we had to fall back on this well to give water to the animals.
Ibrahim and his clan are Fulani Wadabi. The Wadabi are famous for travelling extremely long distances with their herds. But their ancestral way of life is threatened by the successive droughts that have hit the Sahel. Rawada is the leader of this clan. In just 10 years, he has lost half of his cows. He doubts his children will be able to live off the livestock for much longer.
I don't think we can carry on breeding anymore. With climate change, things are becoming more complicated for us, not to mention what will happen for the generations to come.
Every year in Niger, an equivalent of over 110,000 football fields of grassland disappear because of desertification and soil erosion. Despite mounting difficulties, a number of Fulani herders refuse to abandon their livestock. Local radio station Marhaba is supporting those continuing with their annual migration. They broadcast daily bulletins with information about the safety of the various trails, weather forecasts, and the availability of pasture land.
This information is extremely useful to us. It orients us during our journey towards free pasture land and where water is available. The radio helps us avoid certain obstacles.
At the end of the rainy season, once the animals have eaten their fill, the Wadabi Fulani celebrate Garawal, the salt cure. At nightfall, they dance to seduce their wives. A final celebration before they head back out to face new challenges. Soon, the grass will disappear and the ponds will dry up. This time, they will have to walk further in search of new pastures.
Now, the Mediterranean Sea on the Greek coast may look beautiful, but underneath, parts of the sea are becoming a de facto underwater landfill. Now, though, divers are taking action to try and rid the seabed of plastic. Fraser Jackson has more.
These Greek divers are volunteers. They regularly go exploring the seabeds, but they're not looking for marine life, they're fishing for plastic. The turquoise waters of Zakynthos in the Ionian Sea are popular with tourists, but they've also become a real rubbish tip. Old tyres, plastic bottles and cans litter the sea floor, and they often end up in the stomach of fish or sea turtles.
We find plastic ingestion in about 20 to 45% of the animals we have tested.
In Greek waters alone, 11,500 tons of plastic end up in the sea each year. Annually, the country produces 700,000 tons, much of which is non-recyclable.
We don't have to use single-use plastics in our daily life, as there are significant European initiatives for the combat against plastics. I think we have to follow as a country and as individuals.
Part of Greece's problem is the lack of an effective recycling policy. In the past, they've been fined millions of euros for breaking EU waste disposal rules.
Now, Apple Inc.'s television news drama The Morning Show scored 3 Golden Globe nominations on Monday, putting the iPhone maker in the running for its first major Hollywood awards as a new player in the crowded streaming video market. Digital video pioneer Netflix dominated the field, landing 17 nominations in TV categories, plus 17 more for movies, including leading contenders Marriage Story and The Irishman. TV networks, movie studios and streaming services campaign heavily to win Golden Globes and other awards to bring publicity to their shows and help attract new audiences. The Golden Globe winners, determined by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, will be announced in Beverly Hills on January the 5th.